The laser-printed receipt slid across the polished glass table as Principal Whitaker calmly pushed it forward. The stage lights above reflected coldly off the paper. I stared at it. One signature, my signature. Or at least, that's what it looked like. But I had never signed any document like this. Care to explain? Daniel. Whitaker's voice was smooth, even but laced with quiet malice. This release form for STEM equipment worth $50,000 bears your signature. Time stamped 10:14 p.m. Last Tuesday night. The room was silent. Only the dull hum of the ceiling vent filled the void. I clenched my hands tightly on my lap. I didn't sign this. Oh, he let out a soft chuckle. Then how about the surveillance footage? The cameras clearly recorded you entering the supply room after hours. And the following morning, the entire shipment 3D printers, optical scanners, STEM sensors all gone. I glanced around the long table at the board supervisors and parents seated on both sides. Most averted their eyes, but not Mary Henderson Jacobs' mother, the parent of one of the school's largest donors. She stared right at me, eyes sharp as glass. Her lips curled into a sneer as she whispered something to the person beside her. Only one pair of eyes didn't turn away Amber Collins, the veteran math teacher, the only one who'd ever shown me even a shred of respect. She tilted her head slightly, watching in quiet concern. And your explanation for accessing a restricted area at night? Whitaker pressed, still calm. I didn't break in, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. The power system malfunctioned. The breaker panel kept tripping. I reported it to the internal maintenance department. Whitaker pretended to flip through the folder. We checked. No such report exists. The tech department confirms there was no scheduled maintenance that night. I let out a dry laugh. Because you erased it. A brief wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Whispers sliced through my spine like thin knives. Thief, pathetic janitor, knew he was low-class trash. Whitaker leaned forward, voice soft but cutting. Daniel, it's unfortunate you've chosen to destroy what remained of your career here at Crestview High. Effective immediately. You are suspended. And your case will be handed over to the Criminal Investigation Unit. It felt like someone was squeezing the life out of my chest. 15 years I had poured myself into this school, scrubbing every stairwell, fixing every blown circuit, replacing every burnt-out light. And now, they were tossing me out over forged papers. But I knew exactly what this was really about last month. While fixing the server, I accidentally saw the expenditure logs. STEM equipment purchases funneled into hidden personal accounts tied to Whitaker. I stood up, picked up the crumpled receipt from the table, smoothed it out, and placed it neatly back in front of him as a final gesture to preserve what little dignity I had left. You'll regret this, I whispered, and turned to walk away, each step steady and firm. The hallways of Crestview High were as empty as always. Flags hung high, banners glittered under fluorescent lights, Crestview High nurturing tomorrow's leaders. I pressed my lips tight. What a sick joke. I pushed my janitor's cart slowly toward the maintenance room, my only refuge for years, tucked beneath the old gym wing. Inside sat my battered old math notebook, which I often flipped through when I had a moment, a remnant of my youth, back when I once dreamed of MIT, before my family went bankrupt, before my academic ambitions crumbled to dust. That's when I heard soft, sobbing echo from the far end of the hall. I paused, down at the corner by the 9th grade classrooms. A boy sat huddled against the wall, arms wrapped around his knees, head buried under messy brown hair. I recognized him instantly. Ethan Walker, freshman, the orphan who lived with his retired grandmother, a former teacher I had occasionally helped with repairs. Ethan was often the favorite target of rich kids like Jacob. "You all right, kid?" I spoke gently. Ethan flinched, looking up at me with red, teary eyes. Clutched tightly in his hands was a thick notebook filled with scribbles and hand-drawn equations. I knelt beside him and motioned to take a look at the notebook, and froze. Matrix geometry diagrams, elementary tensor transformations, non-linear optimization formulas simplified into intuitive two-dimensional models. My God. This was advanced simulation modeling for electric grid operations, the kind of stuff I'd studied in my sophomore year at MIT. You came up with this yourself." My voice cracked. Ethan mumbled, "It's just how I see things in my head. But my teachers say I'm doing it wrong. They say I need to follow the class formulas." "No." I locked eyes with him. "You're seeing mathematics as a living system, like how a machine operates. That's a gift." Ethan, for the first time, something flickered in his eyes, a faint mix of surprise and hope, but beneath it still lurked fear and doubt. I sighed. I knew that feeling too well. I had lived it. The intercom blared suddenly. "Daniel Carter, you're ordered to leave campus immediately." I stood up, but before walking away, I patted his shoulder. "Keep working on these, kid. We'll see each other again." As I pushed my cart past the corner of the hallway, I glanced back at the glowing Crestview High banner one last time. My dream had shattered here, but for that boy, maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. And I was right. This was only the beginning. Ever since that night, I couldn't shake Ethan's face from my mind. The scribbles in his notebook, the way his eyes, nervous but burning with a strange passion for math, lit up. I recognized it, instantly buried talent. The next day, my official ban from campus arrived. The termination papers were cold and clinical, delivered straight to my mailbox. I had no lawyer, no one to speak for me. With my background as a lowly janitor, who would believe me? Only I knew the truth that Whitaker had orchestrated this entire setup to cover up the financial embezzlement I'd accidentally uncovered. And yet, I went back, not because I was reckless, but because of that boy. Crestview High had an old service tunnel I'd repaired countless times over the years. It was now sealed off, but the key still hung on my ring that Friday night. Once security had finished their rounds, I slipped past the athletic fields, crept along the auxiliary building, unlocked the rusted steel door, and disappeared into the tunnel. The small flashlight cast a weak beam over dusty air ducts and tangled electrical cables. I knew every inch of this place. Our meeting point was an old maintenance room behind the gym abandoned for years. Its walls were lined with aging glass panels. A few obsolete electromagnetic testing machines from the 90s sat covered in dust. Most importantly, it was completely soundproof. No one would hear us here. Ethan was already waiting when I arrived. He clutched his notebook tightly, his face worried. Are you sure this is safe, sir? They said you got fired." I set my backpack down on the table and flipped on the desk lamp. "Don't worry about me, but we can't waste your gift." He hesitated. "But the teachers say I need to follow the syllabus. No one's taught me how to understand any of this." I smiled. pulling out a stack of old MIT textbooks from my backpack. The covers were worn, pages slightly torn. Starting today, I'm going to be the first one to actually teach you real math. Ethan's eyes widened. He bit his lip, torn between fear and excitement. For the first time, I saw it, a silent plea mixed with desperate hope. I placed a diagram of an industrial water pipeline in front of him. Look, this system is just like the equation networks you've been drawing. Each valve is a variable. The flow is the data. You solve this problem like you're balancing the water flow. Understand, he studied it. And suddenly, his eyes lit up. Ah, so balancing water flow is like balancing input-output equations. Exactly, math isn't some dry formula the textbooks shoved down your throat. Ethan, it's alive, just like how the universe runs. The boy smiled for the first time since I'd met him. And so our secret lessons began. Every Tuesday and Friday night. I slipped into the school through the old tunnel. Ethan snuck out to meet me. We worked with real-world models, mechanical levers, optimizing pipe repair costs math he had never seen in his rigid classroom lessons. Ethan had a natural mathematical intuition, but no one had ever guided him on how to turn that intuition into practical formulas. He didn't see math as cold symbols. To him, problems were moving pictures. My job was to teach him how to translate what he saw in his mind into precise mathematical language. Alongside our lessons, I quietly began preparing his application for the upcoming state mathematics competition, a contest typically reserved for the elite gifted students like Jacob Henderson, hand-picked by the school. One night, as we were deep into optimizing electrical grid traffic flow equations, a sudden metallic clang echoed from the main door. Instinctively, I pulled Ethan behind an old equipment rack into the shadows. Heavy footsteps thudded through the dark room. Chief Doyle, the grumpy old head of security who'd never liked me, entered. Strange. Thought I heard something in here. Doyle's gravelly voice rasped as his flashlight swept across the room. My heart pounded. Ethan clung to my arm, trembling. One slip-up and everything would collapse for me, and for his fragile future. Minutes crawled by as Doyle scanned the space. Finally, he grumbled under his breath and left. The light faded behind the iron door. Ethan exhaled, his face still pale. I squeezed his shoulder gently. We're okay, but from now on, we have to be extra careful. That night made it painfully clear how dangerous this had become. But quitting, not when I saw in this boy what society so often crushes talent buried beneath poverty. I had been that kid once, and this time, I wasn't going to let history repeat itself. Each secret night in that old maintenance room slowly became a sacred sanctuary for the two of us. Under the small desk lamp casting light over dusty circuit boards, Ethan sat hunched over the problems he once saw as chaos. I stood behind him like a patient ghost, guiding him through each concept, one step at a time. I saw too much of myself in that boy. Look at this one, I said, pointing to the traffic network diagram we had built. This is a traffic flow optimization problem. The goal is to adjust the traffic lights to minimize total system-wide wait time. Ethan tilted his head. So, we need to balance the speed equations at each intersection. Exactly. And the real challenge comes from unpredictable choke points, random variables. That's called a stochastic disturbance function. I smiled. Looks complicated now, but once you understand how to structure it like a game of Tetris, everything has a logic. Ethan started sketching. His pen flew across the paper, muttering to himself, "If I treat each intersection like a logic gate, then—" He looked up, eyes gleaming. "Like neural network programming, right." I almost laughed. "Kid, you're practically skipping straight to a PhD program." Ethan flushed with embarrassment. But I knew exactly what was happening. He was breaking free from the rigid structure of school. True talent emerges when curiosity finds the right path. But with each leap forward, the risk of exposure grew heavier. I constantly warned him, "If anyone asks, you never mention me." Not because I was afraid for myself, but because I knew too well how the rotten system at Crestview High would crush anyone daring to disrupt their little power structure. Jacob Henderson. That name had become a constant whisper across campus. Son of Mary Henderson, chair of the parent board and primary donor behind the school's STEM program. Jacob was the poster child of Crestview High's elite, handsome, wealthy, a perfect resume. And, most importantly, he was this year's official representative for the state math competition. Whitaker knew perfectly well if Ethan suddenly showed up as a wild-card genius at the competition, it would shake the behind-the-scenes arrangements he had with Mary Henderson. That $500,000 STEM grant was the keystone of Whitaker's upcoming run for the State Education Board. If the embezzlement ever surfaced, his career would be finished. I could see their next move coming. A week later, the preliminary list for the state math competition was posted. Ethan's name was nowhere on it. I clenched my jaw. The dirty game had begun. That night, in the maintenance room, Ethan handed me an email from the competition committee. Application rejected for failure to meet eligibility standards due to lack of official school nomination. I slammed my hand on the table. "They're deliberately shutting you out to protect Jacob's spot." My voice trembled with anger. Ethan lowered his head. Lips pressed tight. For the first time, I saw helplessness creep into his eyes. Fear. The same hollow fear I swallowed back in my sophomore year at MIT, when the bank revoked my family's scholarship funds. No, I wouldn't let history repeat itself. "Listen to me, Ethan," I said gently. "They can block the front door, but if we become good enough, another door will open." He looked up, hesitating. "But if they find out you're helping me, what will they do to you?" I smiled faintly. "What do I have left to lose?" Kid Ethan pressed his lips together, and for the first time, a flicker of defiance sparked in his eyes. I decided to up the stakes. 2 days later, I emailed the state competition board directly, submitting Ethan's independent portfolio, attached with sample problems he had solved. I signed it as an independent mentor. MIT Applied Mathematics. At the same time, I reached out to my former professor at MIT, Dr. Thomas Abrams, who once supervised my unfinished thesis years ago. Though it had been a long time, Abrams still remembered the poor student who'd dropped out. "I owe you a favor from back then. Daniel," he said over the phone, "I'll personally submit a recommendation letter to the state committee," a faint light of hope. I knew we were now playing on a far more dangerous chessboard. I thought I had blocked Whitaker's next move, but I underestimated just how dirty he could play. 3 days after Ethan's supplemental application was officially accepted, everything started to shift. The school's usual pack of bullies led, of course, by Jacob suddenly zeroed in on Ethan, but it wasn't the old-fashioned bullying anymore. This time, they went psychological. "Heard you're some kind of genius now." "Huh? prodigy, Jacob sneered, blocking the entrance to the library, or maybe just a poor little loser getting circus tricks from the janitor. Ethan tried to step around, but the boys closed ranks to block his path. One of them smirked. "You hear the news. Your brilliant mentor almost went to jail. Stole from the school, they say. It cut deep." That's exactly what they wanted, to seed fear and turn Ethan into gossip fodder, breaking him down before the competition even began. That night, in the dusty maintenance room, Ethan struggled through a nonlinear optimization problem. His pen froze mid-equation. His eyes were red, but he fought to keep it together. "Am I really good enough?" Sir Ethan whispered, breathing heavily. "If I lose, will they come after you too?" I gripped his shoulder, locking eyes with him. "Ethan, real talent isn't about beating them. It's about having the guts to climb out of the hole they want to bury you in. Every genius was once called a freak at the start." He trembled. I knew that look. It wasn't just fear of failure. It was the crushing weight of poverty, of class, of being reminded daily that kids like Jacob ruled a world he was never meant to enter. And Whitaker was orchestrating all of it from behind the curtain. The following Saturday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Professor Abrams. "Daniel, you need to prepare yourself." His voice was heavy. Someone sent an anonymous complaint to the state board, accusing Ethan of illegally receiving unsanctioned coaching from a disciplined former staff member. If they verify it, Ethan's application will be revoked immediately. I froze in the middle of my run-down apartment hallway. They were making their real move now. Same old trick, twisting my private mentorship into a formal cheating scandal. That evening, both Ethan and I were summoned to an emergency hearing before the school's disciplinary oversight board convened hastily by Whitaker. The air in that boardroom was suffocating, just like the first time I was framed. Whitaker's cold stare, Mary Henderson's smug smirk, and the silent judgment of the other powerful parents cut through us like invisible bullets. "I regret this, Daniel," Whitaker began with feigned calm. "Your unauthorized contact with a student while under suspension constitutes illegal trespassing. Furthermore, Ethan must regrettably be disqualified from the state competition due to clear signs of unsanctioned coaching outside the school's oversight." I clenched my fists. Ethan sat beside me, pale as a ghost. I heard a few parents snicker quietly behind us. "We have video evidence," Whitaker continued, "conveniently recorded by one of our students." He snapped his fingers. The screen lit up with grainy footage, secretly filmed from the shadows of the old maintenance room, showing Ethan and me working through a transportation flow optimization problem. The room buzzed with murmurs. Mary Henderson smiled, leaning over to whisper into Whitaker's ear, "Satisfied. So you've been following the boy for quite some time now?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. Whitaker shrugged. "We simply monitor students for the sake of institutional discipline." The perfect setup. He had planned every angle. The whispers swelled around us. I knew, unless I could turn the tables right now, Ethan would be officially disqualified. And then the door burst open. "Stop!" A voice rang out cold, sharp, full of authority. Amber Collins strode into the room, clutching her laptop tightly. The entire room froze. "Before any decision is made, I request the board review evidence I've just collected," Amber said calmly, her eyes slicing through Whitaker like steel. I stared at her, my heart pounding. I had never seen Amber like this. Whitaker raised an eyebrow, trying to maintain composure. but the corner of his mouth twitched. The game had just changed. The air in the boardroom grew thick, suffocating. Every eye locked onto Amber, the veteran math teacher who had always kept her head low. Avoiding the school's internal politics, now stood tall, like a soldier marching into battle. Whitaker forced a grin. "Amber, I don't believe this is a faculty matter. This disciplinary hearing." "Silence, Whitaker." Amber cut him off. Her voice rang louder and sharper than I had ever heard. "I have evidence that compels this board to reconsider everything." She plugged a USB drive into the projector. The large screen behind her lit up with a cascade of files, internal school financial statements, email threads between Whitaker and the donor parents, and bank records bearing his name. Gasps rippled through the room. Whitaker's face drained of color. I've had my suspicions for some time. Seeing the STEM program's budget constantly overrun without proper reports. Amber continued. "So I conducted a quiet investigation, gathering data from the servers over the past 2 months. As you can see, over $200,000 in donations funneled into so-called consulting fees directly deposited into your personal accounts. Mr. Whitaker." I gripped the armrest tightly, my heart pounding. Ethan beside me lifted his head, eyes wide, seeing for the first time how rotten the adult world could be. Whitaker shot up, voice shaking with anger. "This is illegally obtained evidence. I'll see you in court for data theft." "Oh, no." "Principal Whitaker," Amber replied coldly, "I was authorized to conduct an internal audit after observing signs of administrative misconduct. The State Education Board has already launched a formal investigation. And," her voice sliced through the room, "they've had this entire dossier in their possession for the last 3 days. Whitaker froze. The board erupted into panicked whispers. Mary Henderson shot to her feet. "Amber, you'll destroy the school's reputation with this. You're sinking your own career." Amber turned toward her, voice razor-sharp. "I'd rather destroy the corrupted image you cling to than watch dozens of gifted children suffocate under this broken system." I nearly stood up and applauded, but it wasn't over. Amber queued up one more video file first. Clips of Jacob and his gang secretly filming through cracks in the maintenance room door. But then came the real bombshell, a clear shot from a hallway security camera showing Jacob discreetly installing a hidden camera, while a voice off-frame gave him instructions. "Get everything on tape. I'll handle the rest." It was Whitaker's voice, unmistakable. Whitaker stood there, completely shell-shocked. His face went ghost-white, eyes hollow. I glanced around at the oversight board. Some members who had long bowed to parent donors were now whispering nervously among themselves. Amber delivered her final blow. In short, Whitaker orchestrated the framing of Daniel Carter using fabricated evidence, exploited minors to conduct illegal surveillance, and embezzled hundreds of thousands in federal education funds. She turned to me and Ethan. And, most importantly, Daniel's work with Ethan was entirely voluntary mentorship after hours, with no financial benefit. I have full video records of every session to support this. The room fell into absolute silence. Finally, the board chair, an elderly vice principal who had sat quietly through the ordeal, spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "Based on this new evidence, I hereby suspend Principal Whitaker effective immediately, pending a criminal investigation by the State Education Department and the District Attorney." Whitaker collapsed into his chair, utterly broken. The vice principal continued. "Furthermore, all charges against Daniel Carter and Ethan Walker are hereby dismissed. Ethan's eligibility for the state competition is fully reinstated. No one applauded, but there was no need. The weight of victory hung heavier than any round of applause. I glanced at Ethan. Tears streamed down his face, but not from despair this time. It was a feeling we both understood justice delayed, but delivered. Amber stood quietly behind us, her expression softening. I nodded at her in deep gratitude. Without her, it would have all been over long ago, but Ethan's true battle still lay ahead. The state competition was exactly 1 week away, and this time, no one would stand in his way, except himself. The day of the competition finally arrived. The state mathematics championship was held at Greenville's Academic Center. Outside, clusters of students in various school uniforms gathered in lively groups, laughter echoing through the plaza. But the mood around Crestview High's team was starkly different, heavy, tense, and eerily silent. Ethan stood among them, dressed sharply in his school blazer, but his hands clenched tightly. From afar, I watched him, seeing not just a boy, but a reflection of myself 20 years ago, alone in a sea of people, carrying a weight that felt like stone pressing on his chest. Jacob was a different story. He strode confidently with a few other students in tow, his swagger untouched, as if the recent scandal had never touched him. Though Whitaker was gone, the parents' network behind Jacob still quietly propped him up. As Ethan walked toward the testing hall, I stepped forward and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. "You remember everything I taught you?" Ethan nodded slightly, his voice shaky. "But if I fail, won't they drag you through the mud again?" I crouched to meet his eye level, squeezing his shoulder. "Ethan, the hardest problem in life isn't numbers on paper. It's learning how to stand back up when the whole world is waiting to watch you fall. You've already stood up once." I smiled. "Now it's time to walk on your own." He took a deep breath, nodded, and stepped into the large examination hall. The door closed behind him, inside the parents' waiting area. I sat alongside Amber. Even she couldn't completely mask her worry. "He's going to do it," I whispered, partly to reassure myself. 4 hours later, the students began filing out. Ethan was the last one to emerge. He looked like he'd just run a marathon, pale, his shirt damp with sweat. I approached him, but before I could speak, he exhaled sharply. "I did it, but the last problem. I misread the linear model at first, almost missed it." I smiled and ruffled his messy hair. "One wrong problem doesn't kill talent. What matters is you beat the fear." The boy smiled a different kind of smile, the kind you only see when someone steps into maturity for the first time. 3 days later, the awards ceremony took place at the Greenville Downtown Hotel. The hall was packed with media, sponsors, principals, and academic officials from across the state. Crestview High's vice principal took the stage to receive the rankings. I stood in the back with Amber, hands in my pockets, my heart pounding. The first place winner of this year's state mathematics championship is Ethan Walker, representing Crestview High School. The hall exploded. The vice principal froze for a moment before stepping forward to present the award, while photographers swarmed the stage, and me. I stood there quietly as hot tears streamed down my face. Amber lightly touched my arm. "You did it, Daniel." "No," I thought to myself. He did it. Jacob stood frozen beneath the stage, his face pale and speechless amidst the cheering crowd. Mary Henderson vanished immediately after the ceremony, skipping the usual donor speeches. The Whitaker scandal continued to unravel over the following weeks. The embezzlement tally ballooned as state investigators dug deeper. Whitaker now faced criminal charges. Members of the education board who had once backed him quietly began to resign. But the most unexpected surprise came from MIT itself. 3 weeks after the awards ceremony, I received an official letter from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, attached to an email from Professor Abrams Daniel Carter. We are deeply impressed with the independent mentorship program you initiated. We are honored to invite you to join the National Advisory Panel for the Financially Disadvantaged Youth Talent Initiative. We believe people like you are essential to breaking class barriers for the next generation. I read the letter again and again. My hands trembled slightly. Once, the gates of MIT had slammed shut in my face. Today, they opened not for the dropout I once was, but for the mentor I had become. That evening, I returned to the old maintenance room where it had all begun. Dusty, empty but warm in a way I couldn't describe. Starting today, I won't be teaching you anymore, I said. Ethan looked up, startled. You're leaving. Not abandoning you. I smiled. It's just time for you to write your own equation now. He smiled back, eyes steady, completely different from the trembling boy I'd once met. Then someday, I'll help kids like you helped me. I pulled him into a hug. In that dark, quiet room, all that remained was the soft, steady sound of two hearts learning how to grow up. 3 months later, the statewide media erupted with coverage of the Crestview High scandal. Editorials filled every major paper. Principal embezzles federal education funds. Academic competition, rigging uncovered, wealthy parent network. Implicated in financial cover-up. Whitaker was officially charged with embezzlement, inciting minors to commit crimes, administrative abuse of power, and faced decades of potential federal prison time. Mary Henderson and her circle of co-conspirators weren't spared either. Financial investigations froze their educational investment accounts, while Jacob was suspended for a full academic year for ethics violations. For Crestview High, the school once draped in the shiny facade of an elite academic institution. This scandal shattered the perfect mask they'd so carefully painted. This morning, I stepped into the MIT campus for the first time since being forced to drop out over 20 years ago. But this time, I wasn't entering as a student. Hanging from my neck was a staff badge for the Mentorship for Underprivileged Genius Youth Program, a new initiative inspired by the very story of me and Ethan. You've accomplished something no one dared believe. Daniel, Professor Abrams said, shaking my hand firmly at the program's opening ceremony, not every problem needs a mathematical solution. Some are only solved through perseverance. I nodded gently, my eyes drifting toward the stage where Ethan stood as the keynote speaker. There he was, steady behind the podium, the spotlight gleaming off his crisp new suit. I was once a poor orphan, Ethan began, his voice calm but full of emotion, bullied, convinced that society had already mapped out my limits. But then one teacher showed me that the only real limit is the fear we let control our minds. He paused briefly, then continued, voice stronger today. I stand here not because of wealth, but because of a belief that intelligence belongs to no class. And I hope that kids like me, tomorrow, won't have to fight alone like I once did. The entire auditorium rose in thunderous applause. My throat tightened as I watched him. That shy boy who once clutched his scribbled notebook in Crestview's hallway. Now stood here a poised speaker, a new flame burning bright, a flame the old world tried so hard to snuff out. That evening, after the ceremony, I returned to my small office at the MIT dormitory where I would begin mentoring a new group of students. There was a soft knock on the door. Amber stepped inside. She was the same, simple, discreet, but her eyes gleamed with unmistakable pride. "You know," she smiled, "I almost didn't have the courage to stand up before the board that day, but I couldn't stomach watching this education system crush another kid like Ethan. I owe you my life." "Amber, no, Daniel, we both owe those kids out there a fair chance." We exchanged a quiet, warm smile. On my way home to my modest apartment in the old industrial district, I passed a worn-out public school. A group of poor kids kicked a dusty soccer ball across the cracked yard in their faded uniforms. I stopped, looking up at the weathered banner hanging over the entrance. "Education is the key for all classes." Once, I had seen that phrase as a cruel joke, but standing here now, I knew I had finally made it true. My story, a janitor falsely fired in disgrace, was just one chapter. The real fight had only begun. For kids like Ethan, and I would be right there beside them. As the evening sun stretched long shadows across the old street, I smiled softly. That hand I thought I'd lost all those years ago had become the opening move in the greatest victory of my life.